Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I've been a truck driver for over 20 years now, delivering goods all across the country. I've seen a lot out on those long, lonely highways, but the terrifying experience I had last week. It started off like any other day. I was scheduled to drive a truckload of restaurant supplies from Dallas to Oklahoma City. It was a routine route, one I'd done countless times before. Usually a boring, uneventful drive along empty rural roads and sleepy small towns. But not on this trip. I woke up early that morning, well rested and ready to hit the road. I loaded up the trailer with pallets of food goods, double-checked my manifests, fueled up, and headed out right on schedule. The first few hours flew by uneventfully as I cruised along the interstate out of Dallas. Around midday, I exited towards OKC on a remote state highway. This stretch was always desolate, rarely any traffic out this way. I was making good time, truck purring along as I munched on some crackers and sipped cold coffee from my thermos. Just me and the open road, the way I liked it. Up ahead, I noticed a car pulled over on the side of the road. As I got closer, I saw a man and woman standing outside the car, staring at me intently. Something didn't feel right, so I decided not to stop and just kept on driving slowly past them. That's when things took a turn. Out of nowhere, the man and woman both pulled out guns and started waving them aggressively at my truck. My heart dropped into my stomach. They were clearly trying to get me to stop. Adrenaline kicked in and I slammed my foot on the accelerator. I was about to stick around to find out what their intentions were. As I sped past their car, they opened fire, the bullets pinging against the side of my truck. I swerved hard to get away from them, losing control of the massive rig. The truck jackknifed violently across the highway. I felt the trailer smash into the back of their car before toppling over onto its side. I braced for impact as the cab lurched over the embankment. Miraculously, I survived the crash without any major injuries other than some bruises and cuts. With my pulse still racing, I scrambled out of the overturned truck and surveyed the scene. Their car was crushed under the collapsed trailer. There was no sign of the man and woman. They must have escaped into a getaway car that I didn't notice earlier. I shivered, wondering what they had planned for me if I had stopped. I hurried to the nearest call box, almost a half-mile down the road, and phoned the police. An officer arrived shortly after, and I recounted the whole terrifying incident. He informed me roadside attacks on truckers were on the rise in the area. They believed it was the work of a ruthless robbery ring targeting cargo trucks for their valuables. When additional police units arrived on the scene, they searched the area for the attackers but found no trace of them. The damaged, empty car apparently had been stolen. Whoever was behind this ambush had covered their tracks extremely well and vanished without a trace into the remote countryside. I gave my detailed statement, answering questions late into the evening. The police said they'd update me if they uncovered any leads, but I'm not hopeful they'll ever find the perpetrators. The weeks since, I still haven't been able to shake the chilling memories from that day. I drive on high alert now, uneasy about every vehicle that passes. Even a car on the shoulder makes my pulse quicken as I grip the wheel tightly. I even considered finding a new job after 20 years on the road, but trucking is in my blood and I don't know anything else. So for now I carry on, cautious of making my deliveries but taking only well-traveled interstate routes, avoiding desolate back roads at all costs. Maybe one day the police will catch the dangerous gang targeting drivers. Until then, I'm keeping both hands firmly on the wheel and stepping on the gas in the slightest sign of trouble. Call me paranoid, but I won't be caught off guard ever again. My coworkers call it nerves and say I'll get over it eventually, but they didn't experience the chilling evil in the eyes of those armed assailants. Roadside violence is the harsh reality of trucking these days, and I don't think I'll ever forget that afternoon. So I check my locks twice when I park at truck stops and keep a loaded revolver by my side as I drive. If those outlaws come for me again, I'll be ready this time. My rate is my livelihood, and they aren't taking it without a fight. I know my wife wishes I'd find a safer job, maybe something local. She hates when I leave on these long hauls, worried something will happen to me out on the desolate highways. I just tell her not to worry, that I can handle myself. But in truth, I worry about it too ever since the ambush. Maybe one more year hauling freight and then I'll look for something closer to home. After 21 years of seesawing across the country, I've had plenty of adventures and misadventures for one career. While I still love the freedom of the open road, lately it seems like unchecked danger lurks around every bend. And I don't want to push my luck. The cowboys of the interstate have to ride off into the sunset eventually, and this tired trucker just might be ready for his final haul. Truck driving can take you through some pretty spooky places, especially at night. My buddy Philip and I learned that lesson real quick during one late night haul through the remote backwoods of Oregon a few years back. We were a few hours into a routine produced delivery run from California up to Portland. It was around 2 a.m., and we were cruising down a pitch-black forest highway outside of Eugene. The woods were so thick and overgrown out there you couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the road. Heavy fog was rolling in, making the impenetrable darkness even more intense. An owl hooted ominously from somewhere unseen in the dense canopy of trees. The increasingly creepy vibe of the place was really starting to get under my skin. Philip and I had been chatting casually to help pass the boring nighttime miles. But as the fog got thicker, we drove on in uneasy silence, focused intently on the twisting rural road ahead. The radio static and rumble of the tires on cracked asphalt seemed unnaturally loud in the muffled air. It felt as if the forest was closing in, swallowing up any traces of light or sound. I shook my head, telling myself I was letting the late hour spook me. Just then we got a hard jolt, followed by the horrible dragging noise of rubber on pavement. We'd blown a tire. Cursing our bad luck, Philip carefully pulled the rig over onto the narrow, muddy shoulder to assess the situation. The busted tire was on my side, so I have to get out there in the dark fog and change it while Philip watched the road with the lights on. As I struggled to wrestle the rusted spare down from the rack, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. These woods were giving me a real uneasy, almost threatening feeling, like unseen eyes were watching us from the shadows. Philip must have felt it too. "Hurry it up, man," he urged nervously, glancing around and shining his flashlight into the blackness. Just then, a blood-curdling female scream cut through the heavy fog, seeming to come from the woods just feet away. It sounded like a woman was crying out in sheer terror and agony. Philip and I scrambled frantically back into the cab, our hearts pounding like jackhammers in our throats. Neither of us wanted to imagine what kind of horrific fate had befallen that poor woman for her to let out a tormented scream like that in the dead of night. We sat there paralyzed for a minute, breathing hard as the echoes faded into the dark forest. The woods surrounding us on all sides now seemed somehow sinister and malicious, as if they had swallowed up the woman and her anguished screams into their cold, primeval void. Who knows what other dangers and unimaginable horrors lurked within those black trees and tangled underbrush. We had to get the hell out of there immediately. Philip slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. We tore off down that fog-shrouded highway, our one good tire, too frightened and pumped with adrenaline to even change the flat at the moment. The trees flew past in a black blur as our headlights cut a feeble swath through the sook-thick fog. We drove like two men possessed for a good 30 miles until we finally reached an oasis of safety, a lonely truck stop on the outskirts of Eugene bathed in bright fluorescent light. Only after we were parked securely under those glowing bulbs could we start to calm down from the stark terror we both felt back there on that cursed forest road. We alerted the skeptical truck stop staff, who called the local police. But the deputy who came out told us those woods were known to play tricks on people's minds late at night. He said they'd thoroughly searched the area and found no trace of anything amiss. No local women had been reported missing either. Philip and I shuddered thinking of that poor stranger screaming for her life out there while doomed to never be found or saved. For weeks afterwards, I couldn't get the memory out of my head. I'd lay awake at night picturing the unknown horrors and pain that woman must have endured at the hands of who knows what evil lurked in those big black woods. Philip flat out refused to take any more Oregon routes at night after that trip. Can't say I blamed him one bit. The void between those densely packed trees still gives me chills when I let my mind wander back to that foggy night. In all my years on the road since, I've come across some odd happenings on night drives through the back country, but none have rattled me worse than hearing that agonized scream rising from the foggy abyss. It was like a tortured voice from beyond the grave, sending a dire warning omen from dark worlds unknown, reminding us mortals that some places hide ancient darkness we best not awaken or disturb. Nowadays, when dispatch tries sending me on an Oregon overnight haul through the forest, I think twice before accepting. Ain't enough money in the world worth driving my rig back down that same cursed stretch of moonlit highway. Some doors are better left unopened. That night in the woods, we stumbled upon a portal to something evil, and I ain't about to tempt fate twice. I've been a trucker for over 2 decades now, driving all kinds of routes across this great country of ours. I thought I'd seen everything there was to see out on the open highways, but nothing could prepare me for the chilling encounter I had a few weeks back while hauling a load down Highway 90 through remote southwest Texas. It was meant to be just another routine delivery day. I was trucking a large shipment of lumber from El Paso to San Antonio. The mid-morning sun was already high and hot as I cruised along the dusty rural highway. The scenery was typical for that area, just endless stretches of shrubby hills, scattered sagebrush, and telephone lines extending out towards the horizon as far as the eye could see. I was about 2 hours into the long, uneventful drive when I noticed something strange up ahead. There on the side of the road was a young girl, maybe around 8 years old, standing all alone and crying inconsolably. Now we were at least 50 miles from the nearest town, so that immediately struck me as very odd. I ain't normally one to stop for hitchhikers, but leaving a small child abandoned on the side of the highway just didn't sit right with me. As I got closer, I could see her little body shaking with sobs. She had her face buried in her hands and didn't even glance up at the sound of my rumbling engine. My heart went out to the poor thing. She seemed so distraught and helpless standing there by herself on the desolate highway. I put on my hazards and slowly maneuvered the lumbering rig over onto the dusty shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. I sat there idling for a moment, hesitation creeping in. This was real out in the middle of nowhere. What if it was some kind of trap? But the sight of the girl's skinny shoulders racked with weeping stirred my conscience. I took a deep breath and cautiously got out, approaching her while scanning the empty landscape around us for any sign of life. There was not a soul in sight, nor any vehicles coming or going, which struck me as mighty strange. "You okay, sweetheart? Where are your parents?" I asked gently, not wanting to scare her any more than she already was. She didn't answer me, just kept weeping with her head down. As I got closer, I could see her clothes were dated and worn like tattered old hand-me-downs that had been washed and mended too many times to count. My heart ached realizing she had probably fallen on some real hard times. I took another step, about to ask the child her name, when a semi came barreling past, blasting its horn loudly. I turned instinctively to glare at the careless driver, but when I looked back to check on the girl, she had vanished without a trace. There was no one there, nothing but barren highway extending for miles in either direction. My blood ran cold in my veins. Where on earth could she have disappeared so quickly? I stood there utterly dumbfounded in disbelief, even rubbing my eyes to make sure I wasn't imagining things. There was no sign of her, no footprints in the dusty dirt, no foliage disturbed, no evidence at all to indicate she had ever been there. The whole bizarre encounter gave me chills despite the blazing South Texas heat. After fruitlessly searching the area for several more minutes, I shakily got back in my rig and continued cautiously down the empty highway, more perplexed than ever. When I stopped for lunch later that day at a sleepy diner in a small town along my route, I asked the waitress if there had been any reports of a young girl gone missing that fit the description. She gave me a bemused look like I was plumb crazy and said no one ever goes missing around these desolate parts. I didn't dare mention the supernatural vanishing act. She'd have thought I was drunk or heat-stroke delusional for certain, but I just couldn't get the image of that sad, lonely little girl out of my mind. After dropping off the delivery successfully in San Antonio, I passed back through the same stretch of Highway 90 on my return trip, keeping my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. As I approached about where I had seen the mysterious child, my stomach dropped. Unbelievably, she was there again, sobbing on the roadside in the exact same spot as before. Even more chilling now, as I slowed the truck, she turned and looked right at me with eyes that seemed ancient, full of eternal sadness. That once again she disappeared instantly, like she was never there at all, leaving me consumed with fearful questions. Back home after that fateful trip, I did some research hoping to make sense of the bizarre encounter. Turns out there are legends all across the country about phantom hitchhikers haunting old highways for ages, never getting their needed ride to some final destination or peaceful rest. Female spirits trapped in endless loops of time, appearing and vanishing endlessly, trying in vain to find someone to pick them up. I'd never believed in ghosts or tall tales until I saw that lost little girl's mournful eyes peering right through me. My coworkers still chuckle when I refuse to run Highway 90 through West Texas, saying I've lost my nerve. But they didn't have to stare down those haunted ancient eyes or wonder if some anguished soul was trying to send a message from beyond the veil. Whatever that little girl was, apparition, mirage, or reality, the memory gives me chills even now, years later. From here on, I think I'll stick to the interstate where everything stays put once you pass it. 'Cause I learned the hard way out there on those lonesome highways. Sometimes not everything is quite as it seems to the eye. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.